Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back to my channel. My name is Taya and this is Taya's Turning Pages. So by the title of today's video, you can tell that this is going to be my June wrap up, and I'm going to try my hardest to not make this video extra long like I normally do, but we will see how this goes. I also just wanted to quickly say that my upstairs neighbor is like literal Bigfoot. She is constantly stomping around, so I apologize if you guys hear any like noise. I will try to filter it out when I go to edit this video as much as I can, but I just wanted to get that out of the way because you might hear some stomping. I don't know. Anyway, let's get started. So I did read a total of 5 books this month, which is one more book than I read last month, so yay me, claps for me. I am going to film this video the way that I typically do with my wrap-ups, so I'm going to start with the lowest rated book and then work my way up to the highest rated book of the month. And the lowest rated book that I have for the month is My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. So I actually didn't even write a formal review for this book on my Storygraph or on my Bookstagram, so you guys are getting an exclusive, sneak peek / access to my thoughts and review on this book. So I still don't really know what rating I want to give this. I'm sitting at a 2.5 / a 3-star review, and I'm not sure which side I'm more so leaning towards, but I will just say, of course, that this is the lowest rated book out of the bunch for the month of June. So this book is actually classified and marketed as a feminist manifesto, and so Emily Ratajkowski talks about her experiences and what it was like to go through the modeling industry as a model, and she really just talks about the misogyny and the sexual harassment and just exploitation that she was facing as a model in the industry. And so for that, I really do commend her and give her my 10s, because anybody that can find the courage and the bravery to speak up and speak out about these experiences and put it out into the world will always get my congrats and my just hats off, because this is not an easy thing to do, because a lot of people that have the platform that Emily Ratajkowski has really should shine a light on the ugly truths of the industry that they're in, and also just really give a voice maybe to the voiceless, especially for those that can't really speak up and speak out against these injustices. So I really do appreciate this book for that alone. But unfortunately, this book did fall a bit flat for me, because this is marketed as a feminist manifesto. I just really thought that there was going to be more to it, and it just really felt like this was Emily's way of getting her thoughts out just like on paper, or so read as like a journal or a diary entry, which is fine. A lot of this comes from Emily's experiences, and I'm not trying to invalidate Emily's experiences at all. Another thing that didn't really click with me when it came to this book was the writing style. Again, because this does mirror a like journal entry or like a diary entry, I just felt like a lot of the points and thoughts were really just like a stream of consciousness. Like it was just kind of like disjointed a bit, and so I didn't really connect with the writing style. And the last thing that I will say is that there were some things in here that Emily talked about that kind of didn't sit well with me. Just the way that she would reference other people and talk about other people and their looks and their personality. It was just a little like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I don't want to say mean girl-esque, but just some of the ways in which she described certain people and their looks and personalities just wasn't the kindest. Obviously, like with anything, when it comes to feminism, when it comes to, racial equality and just things along those lines, a lot of us have to do a lot of learning, but also unlearning. And sometimes that happens in real time. And I wonder if that was the case here with this book. I'm not 100% sure. I did read an article, I forget the title, but I will leave a link down below just in case you're interested in checking it out, that talked about why this book was kind of problematic. I definitely see where the reporter who wrote the story was coming from, and I really did like their thoughts and kind of like the background and context that they provided, and again, why they felt as though this book was problematic. So I will leave that link down below just in case you're interested in reading it. But yeah, overall wasn't my favorite read, but I am glad that Emily was able to kind of use this as like a cathartic experience, I'm sure, to try to get her thoughts out and really process her trauma. And I hope that this book kind of serves as some type of healing for her moving forward. I also wanted to quickly say that I did listen to the audiobook for this versus reading this physically, just because I had some downtime at work, and so I just figured to listen to it on audio. And Emily does narrate this herself, and I really enjoyed her narration, and I'm glad that I was able to pick up on just certain cues and nuances that I wouldn't have been able to pick up on if I would have read this physically. So yeah, unfortunately, this is my lowest rated book of the month. I have seen other Goodreads reviews that talk about why some people rated this 5 stars and why it was their favorite read. And again, I see where they're coming from. I try to really take a step back and really like look at everybody's perspective and understand why some people like certain things and why others don't. So looking at some of those reviews, I definitely thought that there were some valid points made in terms of why they did rate this a 5-star and why I resonated with them. But for me personally, it just missed the mark. And now moving on to the highest rated books of the month. This book that I'm going to show you next is sitting at a 4-star, and it is Breathless by Amy McCulloch. This was Book of the Month's May 2022 pick for their thrillers, and I really enjoyed this one, you guys. This one actually follows a woman named Cecily Wong, and Cecily is actually a journalist, and she more so works in the like nature outdoors sphere of journalism. And so she works for like this nature magazine, and she actually gets offered the opportunity of a lifetime where she can go interview this famous alpinist named Charles McVeigh. And Charles is known as the GOAT in the like mountaineering and alpinist world because he climbs these mountains without any oxygen tanks, without any like equipment, etc, etc. So he's known as a purist. That's what they're called in this like field or industry. He's known as a purist, and so because of all of that, he is like really well regarded, really well respected, and everybody like looks up to Charles successfully climbing a mountain. And so Cecily, like I said, gets offered this opportunity of a lifetime to interview Charles, but the only way she can interview him is if she joins Charles on this mountaineering expedition that he has, where he is going to climb the 8th highest peak in the world in Manaslu. And Cecily actually has a very traumatic experience with climbing and mountaineering and things like that, but because she really wants this opportunity to interview Charles, she decides to kind of put those fears aside and decides to join him on this expedition. And once she gets to the camp and meets, you know, the other mountaineers, Cecily and the rest of the mountaineers start to climb these mountains. Sinister things start happening, and Cecily realizes that there is a killer on the mountain, and the story takes off from there. So I'm going to start with the things that I liked and some of the things that I didn't necessarily like. So one of the things that I really enjoyed was the background and the context on mountaineering and what it means to be a successful alpinist and purist and, you know, mountaineer, etc, etc. I just really loved learning about the intricacies of this industry and just how intense it really is. I obviously understood that climbing any mountain and hiking in general was no easy feat, but to really like get into the nitty-gritty of how dangerous this sport is, it's mind-blowing, honestly. So I have said in my Bookstagram review of this book and just in general that I am really fascinated with Mount Everest and just the horror stories that come along with Mount Everest, because of course, as you guys might know, Mount Everest is, you know, one of like the most dangerous mountains that you could climb just because of how high the peak is, and a lot of people don't make it to the top, whether that means they turn back around and just, you know, climb back down the mountain, or some of them die, you know, on the mountain. And there are so many horror stories and survivor stories, but a lot of horror stories where people have said that when they were trekking up the mountain, they saw human remains that were just frozen on the mountain because it's physically impossible for police and helicopters to retrieve these remains and bring them back down to the family because of how high up the mountain is and the altitude, etc, etc. That is so scary and so heartbreaking when you think about it. I will preface and say that this book really does harp on descriptions in here about what you need when you go up a mountain, what you shouldn't bring, what you should do if, you know, something goes wrong, etc, etc. So if you are not even remotely interested in mountaineering or what it takes to successfully climb a mountain, then this might not be the book for you, because there is a lot of telling when it comes to that aspect more so than showing. Another thing that I really enjoyed was just the direction that Amy McCulloch went in and just how she even came up with this plot. Imagine climbing up a mountain where you're already dealing with the elements and the possibility that anything could go wrong with your equipment, you know, your oxygen tank, the, you know, the like the straps and the tools that you have, and anything could go wrong. But now you throw a serial killer into the mix. That is horrifying, you guys. Like, I don't know if people really understand, but that is a horrifying concept, especially if you're not the most experienced climber and this is like your first time on the mountain. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even like imagine. But I really like the plot and the way that Amy McCulloch, you know, developed this and ideated this, because it's brilliant. It really is. And the actual last thing that I wanted to say that I really enjoyed about the story, the commentary that Amy McCulloch provided throughout. Amy McCulloch herself actually like climbs mountains, and she was actually the youngest Canadian woman to climb Manaslu in Nepal. So she ain't no stranger to this shit, you know what I mean? And so I really liked the commentary that she provided on how people of color and women have to face additional barriers up on the mountain. It was such a asinine thing to read about, because it's like, how are you up on a mountain, especially if you're at the death zone where you can't even think straight, you can't see straight, the only thing you can think about is how cold it is, and you still find the time to be misogynistic and racist. I don't understand that. I think that is such a wild concept. I really do like the fact that Amy McCulloch shined a light on just, again, how even if you're thousands and thousands of meters up away from the actual like world that we have, you know, society, etc., you still might be faced with discrimination and racism and misogyny, and that's such a shitty thing to be hit with. But again, I'm glad that she's talking about those topics and shining a light on them, because people need to know about this. And it's already hard enough climbing a mountain, but to have those additional barriers, I can't even imagine. Now moving on to the things that I didn't necessarily care for. So I did not like Cecily's character all that much, you guys. I don't know. I did not feel as connected to her as I have with other protagonists in my thriller books. I just felt like at times she was a bit like one-dimensional, and I also thought she was a little bit whiny at certain points. And I understood why she was whiny, but like there were certain instances where I was like, Cecily, get it together. Come on, you have to focus. You are literally about to climb this mountain. You've already had traumatic experiences in the past. You need to focus, girl. Like, try your hardest to focus. So I didn't really like care for her as much. Like, I liked her enough, but I didn't care for her as much as I do with other characters in my thriller books. And one thing that really bothered me about Cecily was the fact that she was a journalist, but it took her way too long to catch on to certain clues and red herrings and, you know, nuances that I feel like a journalist would have been able to catch on to pretty quickly. And as someone that works in the communications industry and that has worked with reporters in the past, and I even have friends that are reporters and that work in this field, I know that like Cecily's character in this instance was just really unrealistic, and that usually doesn't bother me because I'm able to suspend disbelief in a lot of my books, but that part really like needled at me because it's like, you're a journalist, like, girl, you should be able to catch on to certain things really quickly. But maybe that's because she wasn't an investigative journalist, so maybe that's why. But I still feel like as a journalist, you should be able to kind of catch on again to like certain like red herrings and stuff like that, because like that is essentially like a part of your job. But overall, I did not really care for Cecily in that regard. Another thing that kind of like bothered me a bit was just this book is really slow paced. Like, this is a slow burn thriller if I ever read one, okay? And I noticed that I'm starting to like slow burn romances, but when it comes to slow burn thrillers, I'm not really the biggest fan unless it's done right. Obviously, this book did do something right in that regard because it got a 4-star rating out of me, so it didn't bother me that badly, but it did kind of irritate me a little bit. Like, it irked me. I guess I'll say that. It irked me because we were just getting bogged down, I feel like, by a lot of details. Like, there were some repeats in here, and I just felt like we already spent like 2 chapters already talking about that. We don't need to go into chapter 4, 5, and 6, and 7 talking about it too, you know? So I just felt like there were a lot of repeats, and again, I just felt like there were certain times where we were getting bogged down by the details. I just wish that this book could have moved a little bit faster in that regard. But yeah, other than that, those are the only things that really bother me about the story, and honestly, they were pretty minor for me. But yeah, overall, I really did enjoy this one, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading more by Amy McCulloch in the future because this is her debut novel. I hope she does write more thrillers. I really also like a nonfiction book that talks about her experiences as a climber. I think that would be really interesting, again, especially because she provided that commentary on how women and people of color have to face additional barriers when up on the mountain. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. Now we're gonna move on to the 4.5-star book of the month, and it is Jewel by Beverly Jenkins. So I know you guys who watch my videos consistently know that I love Beverly Jenkins, and I normally give her books a 5 out of 5 stars, but guys, this is the first book that I rated under a 5-star, but it's still a 4.5 star. So clearly I still loved it. I just didn't love it as much as I loved her other books, and I will get into that in a second. I'm actually just going to read the synopsis for this book because I honestly don't feel like coming up with my own synopsis because there's just so many moving parts. But on the back here it says, a proposal she had no choice but to accept became a love she never expected. Though Eli Grayson is one of the most handsome, charming, and intelligent men in Grayson Grove, no one will take a chance on a confirmed bachelor. Unwilling to give up his dreams, Eli convinces his friend Jewel to pose as his wife. Their masquerade is to last just one night. But when word gets out, Eli and Jewel must tie the knot to save his career and her reputation. Angry at being forced to turn her life upside down, Jewel never imagined that a white-hot passion would consume her once she and Eli became husband and wife. Sharing a bed has turned their prim friendship into a sensuous love affair. But when a woman from Eli's past returns to stir up trouble, he and Jewel will learn just how far they'll go to protect the precious gem of their newfound passion. So now moving on to the reasons why I did not give this a 5 out of 5 stars, and it's mainly because the character development felt a little flat, you guys. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm saying that. Like, I literally cannot believe that I'm saying that, especially because I filmed a whole video talking about how Beverly Jenkins' characters are always fleshed out, connected to them, and invested in them, and I still think that's true, of course. It's just this book, unfortunately, just fell a bit flat for me when it came to that. I felt like because Jewel and Eli knew each other already, we didn't get that like extra background on them, and we didn't get to really like learn their characters individually, just like how they would get to learn each other's characters throughout the story, like in some of her other books. So for example, Through the Storm, Something Like Love, Night Song, the ones that I've read, the characters either didn't know each other or they didn't know each other that well, and they were forced to get to know each other. And because of that, we're taken on this journey right along with them to get to know the characters. Whereas here, because they already knew each other, you did not get to experience that. At least I didn't. But I still did really like Jewel's character. Just like with Beverly Jenkins' other female characters, she definitely fit that archetype of, you know, strong, independent, progressive. And I really enjoyed Eli's character too. I thought he was actually really sweet. Despite him being a playboy, I thought he was actually really, really sweet, especially to Jewel. I just did not feel as connected to them as I normally do. And going off of the character analysis a little bit more, like I read in the synopsis, there is a woman from Eli's past that comes back to try to stir up drama between Eli and Jewel. In the beginning of the story, you're met with her character and she does something so horrific and so violent that you're taken aback a bit. And then once we actually get to the point where she's introduced into the story, where she's going to serve as that drama, I just felt like we didn't get enough from her compared to what we got in the beginning of the book. Like, her character also fell flat, and I just felt like the stakes weren't as high. I felt like her character was built up to really do damage, and when we actually got to it, she didn't want no smoke. So I just felt like her character was pretty useless. There was another character that was introduced into the story that actually did try to cause like harm to Jewel and Eli, and that was like fine. I just didn't understand why we needed that woman from Eli's past to come back if she wasn't really gonna do anything, you know? I didn't really connect with the characters all that much, and I just felt like I was never truly like immersed in their story the way that I have been with her other books. But besides that, I still like love the overall like formula of the book, because like I mentioned previously, Beverly Jenkins does follow a certain formula when it comes to her books, and I loved the passionate and steamy love affair between Jewel and Eli. I really did like the fact that like at first they were really like cold towards each other, and like they were not willing to give their marriage a chance, and then as the story progressed, they were really like becoming infatuated with one another. You could tell that they were truly like starting to care for one another like deeply, and it was just so beautiful and so like cute and adorable to see them go from being like enemies in a way, and then they started to slowly kind of, you know, flirt and be a little touchy-feely, and it was just like, ah, like, you know, it was like one of the little things like, oh my goodness, like getting like a little schoolgirl type of thing when I was reading about their blossoming romance. Regardless, still love her books, still love her, and even though this wasn't my favorite read from her, I still really enjoyed the story for what it is. And it still had all of my favorite tropes: fake dating, marriage of convenience, the one bed trope. It had all of that. It was just the characters themselves that I did not really connect with, and that's okay. You can't win them all. So yeah. Hey guys, and now we're moving on to the 5 stars of the month. So I have 2 books in this category. One of them is a thriller, and then the other one is a YA fiction novel. And so the first book I'm going to talk about is the thriller, and it is Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. Woo, y'all, this book, get into it, yeah. Like, this book was phenomenal. So I'm actually just going to read the synopsis for this book because there's just so much going on with this, and I don't want to spoil anything. I feel like if I try to give this my own synopsis, I'm definitely going to give something away. So I'm just going to read the synopsis. Right here it says, when Paris Peralta is arrested in her own bathroom, covered in blood, holding a straight razor, her celebrity husband dead in the bathtub behind her, she knows she'll be charged with murder. But as bad as this looks, that's not what worries her the most. With the unwanted media attention now surrounding her, it's only a matter of time before someone from her long-hidden past recognizes her and destroys the new life she's worked so hard to build, along with any chance of a future. 25 years earlier, Ruby Reyes, known as the Ice Queen, was convicted of a similar murder in a trial that was a media sensation and riveted the nation. Reyes knows who Paris really is, and when Reyes is unexpectedly granted an early release from prison, she threatens to expose all of Paris's secrets. Left with no other choice, Paris must finally, once and for all, confront the dark past she thought she had escaped. Because the only thing worse than a murder charge is a dark personal history that Paris will do anything to keep hidden. That was the synopsis. Just wanted to quickly say that this was Book of the Month's thriller pick for June 2022. And I'm so happy that this was an option to select from Book of the Month for June, because I never read anything by Jennifer Hillier before, and I've always wanted to. I was actually going to start with Creep and Freak, but I never got a chance to pick those up yet. But when I saw this being offered, I knew I had to put it in my cart immediately, and I was not disappointed. This book was phenomenal in every sense of the word. It is truly more than just your standard thriller. There is so much else that is wrapped up into this book that I just appreciate Jennifer Hillier for including. We'll just give a few brief trigger warnings. There is a mention of child abuse as well as sexual abuse of a child, so definitely keep that in mind. If that is something that you of course cannot, you know, read about, this won't be the book for you. I don't typically read books that have those topics just because it's so heartbreaking and devastating, and it just infuriates me that this is happening to so many children in the world. But I did not know that going into this book, so when I got to those parts, I was like, whoa, okay, I'm gonna have to take a little break here, and I did. But I returned back to the book, and I just really loved the story. It was very compelling, and the character Paris, as well as the character Joey, I love them. I love them with everything in me, and I was so invested in their characters and their well-being, especially Joey. I really want to talk about Joey more so than anything because Joey was the one that faced those issues of abuse, and all I wanted to do was scoop her up into a hug and just tell her that one day everything will be okay and the people that have wronged you will get theirs in the end. And they did. So I love that for me. And I love that for Joey. She went through so many traumatic things in her childhood that I just got whiplash from trying to keep up with all of the things being thrown her way. She's filled by literally everyone in her life, especially her mother. To know that there are some parents in the world that are like this, that don't have their child's best interests at heart, that don't really care about their children, it's heartbreaking and it's devastating. And it really makes you think about one of the impacts that this overruling of Roe versus Wade is going to have on our country. There are going to be so many other children that might be put into this situation because of the implications of this overturning. But going back to the story itself, well, as Joey, like I said, loved her character. She deserved so much better, and the cards that she was dealt in life, it was a shitty hand. And I'm really glad that she was able to experience some silver linings in her life, because when those silver linings did present themselves, they shine bright, okay? They shine bright, especially at the end. But I really love Joey's character. I'm like getting emotional because like it just felt as though she was real. Jennifer Hillier did such a beautiful job at crafting Joey's character and just making the reader become invested in her and her well-being. And y'all know I'm a character-driven reader, so when authors are able to do that, they always get a point in my book, and I always give them their 10s because that's not an easy feat. It's not easy to make a reader feel connected to a character, especially a character that's not perfect. And Joey was not perfect by any means necessary. She did not deserve any of the abuse that was being inflicted on her. Period. Really loved her character. In terms of Paris, also really loved Paris's character. I thought she was really funny, she was really witty, and despite being charged with a horrific crime, she took it on the chin and she held her composure really well, which is something that a lot of us, of course, would not be able to do. So yeah, I liked Paris's character too. Moving on to the actual plot itself, I really liked it. I liked the twists and turns. I liked how the story came together in the end. Not gonna lie to y'all, I did figure out one of the major twists early on, but that didn't bother me because I was still invested in the story and I was still invested in Paris and Joey, and I wanted to know how their stories were going to end. So that didn't bother me, and there was so many other little twists and turns that popped up throughout that I did not see coming, especially the end. Because I rated this 5 stars, I really don't have any negative things to say about this book. I loved it. Those were all of my thoughts on Things We Do in the Dark. I felt like my thoughts were a little all over the place, and that's just because I don't want to spoil anything because it's a thriller and you guys know how these go. Overall, I definitely recommend this book if you can get past the trigger warnings and if this sounds interesting to you. I'm definitely going to pick up more of Jennifer Hillier's works, so I think I am going to pick up Creep and Freak next, so that way I can give those a read and see what those are all about, because I've heard nothing but great things about all of her books, but especially those ones, and I think those are her like first 2 books that she ever put out, so I definitely need to read those. All right, y'all, we are on the last book, and this is the final 5-star of the month, and it is Hurricane Summer by Asha Bromfield. So this actually follows a young Black Canadian girl named Tilla who lives with her mother and her younger sister Mia. And Tilla's father, who is Jamaican, lives in Jamaica. And so because of this, Tilla's mom wants Tilla and her sister Mia to spend some time with them and to really get to know Jamaica and their culture. And Tilla is not happy about going to Jamaica to see her father just because her and her father, Tyson, do not have the best relationship. It's very complicated, but Tilla, of course, has no choice but to go. So Tilla and Mia hop on a plane and go all the way to Jamaica. And once they're there, they start to fall in love with the island and their people, and they constantly describe it as paradise. There's also a little romance that starts brewing between Tilla and someone else. Overall, Tilla just starts to really look forward to the summer. But of course, she still has these complicated feelings about her father and her relationship. And unfortunately, as Tilla's summer starts to progress, things start to spiral out of control. And while Tilla is dealing with so many different hardships when it comes to her family and learning the culture and just being an outsider, a hurricane actually hits Jamaica, and now Tilla and her family have to try to survive, and the story takes off from there. I actually just wrote my review for this book today, which is Thursday, July 7th, so I will leave that post link down below in the description box just in case you don't follow me on Bookstagram and you want to see more of my thoughts on the book. I wanted to say it has taken me a while to truly articulate my words and my thoughts and my feelings on this book, because similar to Tilla, I have experienced so many emotions when reading this book. It was truly a up and down roller coaster, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath from it. And I guess I would start off with the characters, more so Tilla, just because she is of course the main character in this story, and I saw so much of myself in her, you guys. It was actually scary how similar Tilla and I were, especially when I was her age. So Tilla's about 17 or 18. I could see myself in her a lot, especially with some of the things that she said, some of the things that she did. I was like, yup, that's something that I would have said, or yup, that was something that I said or did. And so because of that, I automatically like became attached to her and had a fierce protectiveness over her. Whenever another character would say something mean about her or make snide comments or just make her feel less than or make her feel othered, I was like about to throw the book. I was like literally about to chuck the book across the room because I was getting so angry at how she was being treated by people that were supposed to be her family. And it really upset me. But I love the fact that Asha Bromfield was able to make me, the reader, feel that connected to a character, especially a teenager, a YA character at that. But I love Tilla's character. Was she perfect? No, not by any means. There were so many things that Tilla did that did not make sense, but at the same time, she was a kid, and kids do things that don't make sense. And so because of that, I gave her a lot of grace, and I also tried to take a step back and think about how I was as a child and how I was during her age, and thought to myself, you know, as children, they need grace. They need the space and grace to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, and to do better moving forward. And I just felt like Tilla was never given that opportunity from her family in Jamaica, and it really upset me, especially when it came to her father, the one person that was supposed to be in her corner on this island. He constantly believed the worst in Tilla, and it was devastating. It was heartbreaking, and I felt for her every single time he disappointed her, because you could feel the emotion, you could feel the devastation, you could feel the disappointment, you could feel the heartbreak and the heartache that Tilla was experiencing whenever her father did something that just parents shouldn't do when it comes to their kids, you know? So yeah, I really felt for Tilla. I loved her as if she was real, as if she was my little sister or something like that. I just loved her. And Asha Bromfield, I cannot commend her enough for pouring her heart and soul into creating a compelling character such as Tilla. I'm sure that's because she took her own experiences and put them into Tilla. And it's also really crazy to think about that so many of us experience similar things. I see what some people say in the comments on like certain TikToks where they're like, I do not have one original experience, because we all experience like similar things to a degree. And reading this from Tilla's perspective, I just related to so many things that she was going through. The way that Tilla was trying to navigate her emotions and her feelings when it came to her complex relationship with her father, I definitely think that resonated and can resonate with a lot of other Black girls and Black women. Kind of expanding on that a little bit more, I talked about this in my review on my Bookstagram. I think Asha Bromfield executed the exploration of Black girlhood and Black fatherhood very well. Very, very well. It is so, I keep saying the word complex because that's what it is. For so many of us, it is very complex. It's a very sensitive subject. So for Asha to kind of just like lay it all out there on the table and to really just like show you the implications of having a complicated relationship and the implications of having a strained or not so great or complicated relationship with your parent. It was just so refreshing to see that, especially in a YA novel, when this is a time where a lot of teenagers are having those tumultuous and volatile feelings when it comes to just different things, especially their relationship with their parents. So I just think that this is a great book for any YA reader to pick up and read. Even if it's not something that they're going through themselves, I still just think that this is such an important novel because it talks about not only fatherhood and girlhood, but it also talks about classism, it talks about elitism, it talks about colorism, texturism, even like fat phobia explored in the book. Like there's so many different things that Asha Bromfield was able to discuss and shed a light on in this book that it was just brilliantly done, especially for a YA novel. I keep saying that, but it's the truth. Like there are times where I was reading this as if this wasn't even a YA novel because of how these topics were just so mature, but it's the reality where so many children and teenagers, especially so many Black children and teenagers. So I just loved all of that. Like this book has so much substance, it has so much depth, it has so much oomph and like meat to it that I couldn't put it down. And when it was over, I definitely had a book hangover because I just became so invested and connected to Tilla, and I wanted to learn more about her. I wanted to know how she was going to heal from this summer in Jamaica, because I will just give a trigger warning that there is sexual assault in here. I really just wanted to know how Tilla was going to move forward from that. Even though this got a 5 out of 5 stars for me, I would say that's the only critique that I have of this book, is that I just wish that there could have been an epilogue. You guys know I'm the queen of epilogues, okay? I'm the queen of epilogues, and I will wear that crown and hold that title with pride. But I just really think that for a book like this, it would have been nice to just have an epilogue so we could see how Tilla was healing from that traumatic experience, so we could see how Tilla's relationship was with her father now, or other people on the island, etc., etc. But I understand that not all the time are you going to get that, and sometimes there are stories that are just left unwritten. Word to Natasha Bedingfield. But there are some stories that are just left unwritten. And there's a quote in this book that I really liked, and it says, sometimes there aren't happy endings, sometimes there's just a storm. So because this book lacks an epilogue, I think that quote encapsulates this book really well, because it makes sense. It's the truth. There were some people on the island that Tilla never got to reconcile with, she never got to make amends with, and it was just one of those things where you have to charge it to the game. And I'm really glad that Asha Bromfield didn't give certain characters a redemption arc, because there were some characters in here that did Tilla dirty. They did her so dirty. I'm talking like throwing her trauma back in her face and just making the most snide and awful comments that you can make towards a person. And so I'm glad that Asha Bromfield didn't try to give them a redemption arc, because it just wouldn't have felt authentic and it wouldn't have been realistic, of course. So I really like the fact that she kept this as real and raw as possible. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. As you guys can see, I'm getting emotional and still having a hard time articulating my thoughts for this book, because there was just so much that was explored here, and there's so much that you can unpack here. I feel like I only scratched the surface of just how important and how poignant this book really is. But because of that, I definitely recommend that you should just pick it up and give it a read yourself, because it was brilliant. And Asha Bromfield was going to come out with another book in 2023. I'm not sure what that one is about. I'm going to pre-order it if it's possible. This book will definitely be featured in my 2022 favorites video at the end of the year, because wow, I haven't read a YA book that has evoked this many emotions out of me since I read You Reach Sam a couple of months back. And this is my constant reminder and PSA to you guys that just because they are marketed towards a YA audience doesn't mean that they're not good books, and it doesn't mean that you can't pick them up and give them a read, because you might just stumble upon a new favorite. That's all I'm saying. YA books get a lot of flack and a lot of hate. I understand that some of them are, yes, very young. There are some gems that are like this that truly transcend audiences, in my opinion. Right, y'all, and those are all of the books that I read for June, and as you can see, I had a great reading month in terms of the quality of books. I really only had one dud and the rest were bangers, and I'm really happy about that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me and my channel out. And lastly, please make sure you follow me on Bookstagram as well as Storygraph. I will leave all of that information linked down below, as well as at the end of the video, like I always do. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!